Let me give you a warning. Not a prediction, not an opinion, a warning. The kind that serious people who have spent their careers studying monetary systems, commodity markets, and the history of imperial overreach issue, when they see a convergence of forces so dangerous, so structurally destabilizing, that silence becomes its own form of negligence. What I am about to tell you will not appear on your financial news channels. It will not be discussed at your central bank press conferences. It will not be acknowledged by the politicians who caused it. But it is real, it is already in motion, and the window to understand it clearly before the full consequences arrive is closing faster than most people realize. The United States and Israel have just launched a war against Iran, and I need you to understand something immediately before we go any further into the analysis. This war did not begin because diplomacy failed. This war began because diplomacy succeeded and Washington bombed it anyway. Iran had agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium. Iran had agreed to full IAEA verification. Iran had agreed to irreversibly downgrade its enriched uranium stockpiles to their lowest possible level. A breakthrough, in the words of the Omani foreign minister who helped broker it. The agreement was essentially done. The ink was metaphorically on the table, and the United States and Israel launched their strikes while those negotiations were still formally ongoing. Read that again and let it land, because what it tells you is not merely that a war has started. What it tells you is that the people running Western foreign policy are now operating in a zone so detached from rational strategic calculation, so captured by ideological compulsion and institutional momentum toward conflict, that they will destroy a finished diplomatic solution in real time to justify a war they had already decided to fight. That is not a foreign policy. That is a symptom of imperial terminal decline, and it carries economic consequences that I believe are genuinely historic in their potential severity. So here is your warning, stated plainly before the full analysis. What is now being set in motion in the Persian Gulf has the potential to do three things simultaneously that no single geopolitical event in the post-war era has done before. It has the potential to trigger a global energy supply shock of a magnitude the world has never experienced. It has the potential to land that shock on the most over-leveraged financial system in recorded history at precisely the moment that system is least equipped to absorb it. And it has the potential to serve as the decisive accelerant that transforms the gradual, managed decline of dollar hegemony into a sudden, disorderly, irreversible collapse. Any one of those three things alone would constitute a major economic crisis. All three together, arriving simultaneously, interacting and amplifying each other in real time, constitute something that serious monetary historians will write about for generations. That is your warning. Now let me show you exactly why. We have been living through what any honest monetary historian would characterize as the late imperial phase of American dollar hegemony. This is not a fringe observation. This is a conclusion that flows naturally from reading the data. The United States has been running structural current account deficits since the early 1970s, when Nixon closed the gold window and transformed the dollar from a currency backed by a hard asset into a currency backed by a geopolitical arrangement. Specifically, the arrangement with Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in dollars in exchange for American military protection. That arrangement, the petrodollar system, has been the foundational architecture of American economic power for over 50 years. It is the mechanism by which the United States has been able to export its inflation to the rest of the world, to run deficits that would have bankrupted any other nation on earth, and to maintain a standard of living artificially elevated above what its productive output alone would justify. That system has been under structural strain for at least a decade. The BRICS expansion, the Chinese yuan oil contracts on the Shanghai exchange, the bilateral trade agreements denominated in national currencies rather than dollars, the gold accumulation by central banks across Russia, China, India, and the global south. All of these are symptoms of a world that has been quietly, methodically constructing an exit from dollar dependency. The architects of that exit understood something that Washington's political class has consistently refused to acknowledge: that the dollar's reserve status is not a law of nature, it is a political arrangement. And political arrangements can be renegotiated, they can be abandoned, they can collapse. Now, into this already fragile system comes the Iran war. And the timing is not incidental, it is everything. Global debt, public and private combined, is sitting at approximately 350% of global GDP. That is not a sustainable ratio under normal conditions. Under the conditions now being created in the Persian Gulf, it becomes actively dangerous. When oil prices spike, and we are already watching Brent crude surge past $80 a barrel, with serious analyst projections reaching 100, 150, or $200 per barrel in a prolonged Strait of Hormuz closure scenario. The effect on an over-leveraged global economy is not linear, it is multiplicative. Because energy price inflation feeds directly into the cost of debt service. Central banks that were already caught between the need to control inflation and the need to avoid triggering a debt crisis are now being forced into an impossible position. If they raise rates to combat energy-driven inflation, they accelerate the debt crisis. If they hold rates or cut them to support over-leveraged borrowers, they allow inflation to become entrenched and destroy the purchasing power of their currencies. There is no clean exit from that trap. There is only the choice of which form of pain you prefer. Let me give you the numbers, because the scale of what a genuine Strait of Hormuz closure means for global commodity flows is something that most people have no frame of reference for. Approximately 17 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through that strait every single day. That is roughly 1/5 of all the oil the world consumes. Qatar ships approximately 77 million tons of liquefied natural gas through that corridor annually, representing close to a quarter of the entire global LNG trade. The UAE exports approximately 2.5 million barrels per day through the strait. Kuwait ships around 1.7 million barrels per day. Iraq, which is almost entirely dependent on Gulf export routes, ships over 3 million barrels per day. When you add this together, you are contemplating a supply disruption of a magnitude the global economy has never experienced. The 1973 Arab oil embargo, which caused so much economic damage that we still reference it as a historical turning point over 50 years later, involved a supply reduction of approximately 5 million barrels per day. We are now looking at a potential disruption 3 to 4 times that size, and the IRGC commander has declared the strait closed and stated that any vessel attempting to pass will be set ablaze. 150 ships are already stranded. Tanker traffic has come to a near halt. We have not seen anything like this in the history of the strait. Now, I want to address something that most financial commentators are not yet discussing, which is the derivatives exposure embedded in global energy markets. The oil futures market is not simply a place where producers and consumers hedge their physical exposure. It has become a vast speculative architecture with notional outstanding positions that dwarf the underlying physical market by orders of magnitude. When you get a price move of the magnitude, we are now witnessing a 13% single session spike in Brent crude, with credible projections of moves 2, 3, or 4 times that size ahead. You do not just get paper losses, you get margin calls, you get forced liquidations, you get counterparty failures. You get the kind of cascade event that turns a commodity price spike into a systemic financial crisis. We saw a preview of this dynamic in the nickel market in 2022, when the London Metal Exchange had to suspend trading and cancel transactions because the price move was so extreme, it threatened to bankrupt major market participants. The oil derivatives market is incomparably larger. The systemic exposure is incomparably greater. And the institutions carrying that exposure are the same global banks already sitting on enormous unrealized losses in their bond portfolios from the rate rises of 2022 and 2023. The shipping insurance market is another transmission mechanism that almost nobody is talking about yet, but which will become critically important very quickly. The Lloyd's of London market and the broader marine insurance infrastructure have already been under significant stress from the Red Sea disruptions caused by Houthi attacks over the past 2 years. War risk premiums on Gulf vessels have been rising. Now you have a conflict that has spread directly into the Persian Gulf itself, with confirmed tanker attacks, with the IRGC explicitly threatening to set ablaze any vessel attempting passage. Under those conditions, the insurance market does not simply raise premiums, it withdraws coverage entirely. And when vessels cannot obtain war risk insurance, they cannot legally operate under the terms of their financing arrangements.